Well, hello, let's start properly then. Bore da, croeso cynnes I chi gyd. Welcome to our webinar. It's a panel session today talking about AI and the Welsh public sector workforce. And we will be using a scenario-based approach to talk about some reports that have just been released. So we're going to begin, a couple of housekeeping things. I've said it repeatedly, so sorry if you've heard this repeatedly this morning, but we're using the chat. Feel free to type questions in there. Use Cymraeg neu Saesneg, write in English or Welsh. We will be recording this session, so if you do not want to appear on the YouTube recording, please make sure your camera's off. And just while the presentations and the panel are talking, it would be appreciated if you kept your microphone on mute as well, please. We will bring people in happily at the end where we can feature you, talk to you, bring up the cameras and the microphones as well. But for now, if you would do that, that would be much appreciated. Okay, we're just going to start, I think, by asking everyone to give a click on this Menti. This QR code here will take you to Menti, and we're going to use Menti throughout to capture some feedback. So you can join either by using your phone, scan the QR code, or by heading to menti.com and entering the code there. This is of great interest to us to see who's here and how you are situated, where you are in your organisation and what you do. Okay. So I'll start, while everyone's doing that, I'm going to start off with a bit of background then, and then I'll introduce the panel. And as I say, we'll use some scenarios to bring the reports to life. So by means of background, I want to introduce the social partnership model in Wales. It's a framework for collaboration between government, trade unions and employers to improve working conditions, public services and economic well-being. It's based on the principle that key stakeholders should work together in decision-making, particularly in areas like fair work, public service reform and economic development. The Workforce Partnership Council is a key mechanism within that social partnership model in Wales. It serves as the main forum where the Welsh Government, trade unions and public sector employers come together to discuss workforce-related matters. The WPC has recently published guidance to managers, trade unions and other worker representatives on the use of algorithms and artificial intelligence systems in devolved public sector workplaces, particularly for the management of staff and their work. The guidance considers the opportunities and risks related to technological systems that are used to manage people at work. For example, things like in recruitment, task allocation, shift allocation, or staff monitoring. And it provides general principles that should guide representatives of employers and worker representatives in engaging with dialogue and decision making on the topic. So that's the background to this session. Your panel and I are going to use a scenario-based approach, as I say, to expose some of the main ideas and the principles from the guidance. And we'd love to hear your questions and thoughts in the chat as we go through or at the end. So you can see the agenda there. We're pretty much through the introduction part, the welcome. I will introduce the panel in just a moment. But I think we're on to the next slide now, Mike, please. So just to say who we are and why we're here. So I'm Peter Thomas. I work for the Centre for Digital Public Services. I'm lead for AI and head of digital skills and capability. CDPS, you may know, hopefully, as you hear, was set up a little while ago to improve public services for Wales. I was part of the Workforce Partnership Council group that helped create these reports. We have a pan-sector remit, bringing people together, like this morning. This is what we're all about, bringing people together from all across public services in Wales. And as you can see, this is our mission up on screen. We've been busy talking about the guidance to everyone with whom we work. I'm joined by a panel today, and these are our illustrious colleagues. I'm delighted to have these people with us today to talk us through the report. So let me start on the left. We have Dr. Philippa Collins here, who is a senior lecturer in law from the University of Bristol. Philippa's expertise lies in labour law, human rights, and her research is all about rights being enforced and conceptualised, workplace technology, and human rights. We have Mr. Glyn Jones, who is our Chief Digital Officer for the Welsh Government. Moving on to Mr. Thomas Hoyles. Hi, Tom. Tom is our Politics, Press and Research Officer from the GMB Union. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see Aimee Symonds. And Aimee is our Deputy Director for HR, Planning and Delivery. So welcome all to the panel. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'm going to hand over first off to Philippa, who's going to set the scene a little bit about the report, just a bit of background. So over to you, Philippa.
Thanks, Pete. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see so much enthusiasm to hear about this report. You can find it on the QR code if you scan that, or just Google the title there. And thanks for putting it in the chat, Josh. So it's actually two connected reports, but I think for the most part, we'll be focusing on this managing technology that manages people. And really what this report is focusing on is this idea that increasingly technology, which could include artificial intelligence, is being used to support, assist, or kind of entirely to delegate to a piece of software functions that previously would have been performed by an employer, a human within an organization. And we've seen evidence growing in the last decade or so that actually almost every function that previously would have been performed perhaps by a human resources manager or by a line manager can be supported or delegated to a particular piece of technology. These technologies vary. They can be developed within an organization or they can be purchased on the market. There are some very kind of well-known and widely reported instances of this. So, for example, Amazon fulfillment centers have been quite heavily covered in the media, and they are quite a strong example of where technology is used really throughout the employment relationship, from recruitment through to management within an organization, of allocation of tasks and evaluation of the performance of those tasks, all the way to making decisions around whether employees should be kept on within the organization. So you can see that this is a really current challenge facing employers and indeed their social partners. So in this case, we're talking primarily about trade union representatives within organizations. And it's something that we felt that through the Workforce Partnership Council, we could make a really useful contribution to the discussion by setting out a fairly detailed document which talks social partners, so employers and their unions, through the process that you might undertake if you were going to think about introducing a tool of this kind. And it really does go through from before making decisions around whether to procure or to build a system, during implementation, what kind of topics, what kind of discussions might you be having, and then what sort of steps should be undertaken after a process has been implemented. And I think really I'll just focus quickly on the guiding principles that we put into the guidance, because we appreciate that this is a really dynamic area and it's an area where different organizations might be facing very different challenges and have particular needs that they need to reflect when they're making decisions. So we set in place these 5 guiding principles, which are drawn from a kind of unique Welsh way of working, and we wanted to reflect them really strongly and prominently in the guidance. So the first, and I would say overriding guiding principle, is that of social partnership. So the idea of working productively and collaboratively between employing organisations and union and worker representatives. And in the case of the Workforce Partnership Council, for example, which is run in social partnership, that might also be facilitated by a wider organisation or by, for example, the Welsh Government itself. The second principle is the preservation and prioritisation of human oversight, so thinking about the governance and the strategic oversight that is in place, and also human interaction. So that's both making sure that within your organisation, you're preserving and making space for human communication and community building, but also human interaction with the system. So making sure there is human that is considering the decisions made by a system and can, for example, override them if they seem to be inappropriate. The third principle that we put in place is adherence to the Welsh Government's definition of fair work. So the presence of observable conditions at work where workers are fairly rewarded, heard and represented, secure and able to progress in a healthy and inclusive working environment. So particularly thinking there about the risks to rights and also to make sure that we are avoiding discrimination. Third, a commitment to building capability. This is something that we really heard from both employers and employees, that we really need to build capability and skills around integrating algorithms and technology across the entire workforce. And finally, something that is commonly raised as a concern is that we need to maintain a commitment to the protection of jobs, the creation of jobs, and investment in the workforce. It's something that's really understandably a concern for workers, particularly that via the use of these systems, their jobs may be placed at risk. And we really wanted to make sure that we retained a commitment to that preservation of jobs and even creation of jobs and new types of jobs necessary to interact with these technologies. And I think that's a quick overview, but you can find plenty more detail from the report there. And as Pete says, we're happy to take questions throughout the session, and there'll be opportunity for some dialogue with our audience as well.
Thank you very much, Philippa. Brilliant. Right, we're on to the really exciting part now, which is to look at the scenarios. So we have two for you, and if we go on to the next one on the screen, and we have this in Cymraeg and in English, so we'll flip between the two. But let's dig into this one for a moment. And this is the very first one, all about an AI-driven recruitment tool. So we've generalized to say any public body, but you can think of your own in this situation. A public body wants to implement an AI-driven recruitment tool to speed up hiring for public sector roles. Trade unions and employee representatives are concerned about potential biases in the algorithm and a lack of involvement from workers in the decision-making process. Okay, we think it's a fairly realistic situation, and I wonder, can I come to Aimee first, please, on the panel, and ask you, do you see this as a realistic situation? Is it on the horizon? Is this sort of thing here already?
Well, I think there are stated reports that kind of globally it's already here. I know Philippa mentioned Amazon earlier. There was quite famously, it was reported back in 2018 that Amazon had used an AI recruitment tool that actually was found to unfavourably treat women. So, you know, they took the decision to remove the tool at that time. I think, you know, there are many organisations already using or exploring use cases for AI. Particularly in recruitment, where there are sort of high volume transactional things that go on in the recruitment process around sourcing, screening, interviews and selection. And in a recent global study by HR think tank Strategic HR Management, 92% of HR leaders actually reported participation in AI implementation. So there is a huge kind of excitement, I guess, about AI adoption and the possibilities. So it is possible that organisations that are excited by the prospect of the innovation and efficiencies that AI can bring to processes like recruitment, that they just press on without the involvement of their people. But I'd like to think that public bodies were amongst the best in terms of working in true social partnership, engaging with their people and best practice in that regard. So whilst it's exciting, particularly for me as a HR professional, to see how this technology is transforming the workplace, there are many considerations that need to be made before its adoption to understand the opportunities, but also the risks, limitations and potential biases. And so to fully understand those things, you do need to look at it from multiple lenses. So engagement and involvement of your trade unions, workforce representatives. It's fundamental to developing AI models that serve both the needs of the business, but also the needs of the workforce. So in reference to the report that was flashed up earlier on, the Managing Technology That Manages People report, for me, this was an excellent example of social partnership working, which sets out the core considerations and ways of working that departments should adopt when considering AI-driven tools in the workplace, especially in HR, because it is so close to the workforce, you know, it's everything. So I'd urge those of you out there who are considering the use of AI tools to bring about benefits to your organisation to use this guidance to steer your work and consider how you can bring in the many voices around your organisation to help shape that implementation. Because there's real power in the opportunity of AI, but only if we truly understand it and work together to build that understanding. So I do think there is a very real prospect of it happening, but in the public sector and with the guidance and principles that are in place, if we use them properly, we should not get ourselves into a position where this is something that happens.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, that's great. I'm going to dive into the employee's point of view now, just to see, Tom, can I bring you in here and ask you to tell us a bit about any of the concerns that you're hearing from union members or employees?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Peter. And I want to thank you and Mike as well for the wonderful picture you put up with me in the beginning. What a smoky individual I looked like there, someone brooding. I'm much better than the GIF I was going to send over, so I'm very happy that I delayed that and didn't push that through. So one of the other things I'd quickly say before I start, just in terms of the reports, they are very readable. I think one of the things that quite often people have concerns with this stuff is how difficult and how out of context a lot of this stuff is. The report is extremely readable. So when you get an opportunity, please do go read them. So I think one of the issues we have with the use of AI or unions have generally, and particularly workers, in the use of AI in the recruitment process is that it mirrors a lot of the issues we already have with the recruitment process, but takes away a level of accountability. So what you find, for example, is that these systems are designed with AI, and AI doesn't actually think for itself. It is a process where it runs loads of small processes together on a computer and gives you an output. So it does gets rid of all the boring work. So in one respect, we completely understand why many HR organizations and companies would like to do it, because it takes a lot of the boring CV writing, all those parts out of it, reading out of it. But actually what it doesn't do is have that level of accountability for the issues around some of the potential biases. So already trade unions have big questions about biases within recruitment policies, marginalized groups, BAME representatives, disabled workers, they are underrepresented throughout society. The public sector is better at representation, but it still is inherent. And what we think we would need to see examples and evidence of for implementation is that this is taken into account. Let me just take that off my list there. So I've done that one there. Particularly because one of the things that we see often, particularly with those marginalised workers at the moment in the public sector, is that getting them through into higher roles is a big issue. So, for example, where you've got situations where people were possibly looking for progression in work and going through that process, those inherent biases may actually count against them in this thing. So that level of accountability is very, very important. There's a skilling issue there as well. Actually, it is a difficult thing to do and to get right. And actually, you do need skilled representatives running these processes who will understand somehow how to get around some of those biases, what processes are necessarily in place, and how the best way to bring the best out of those candidates before they get to the interview stage. So for us, we think there's a de-skilling issue there. And again, the lack of accountability will generally mean that, if it's a piece of software that says this candidate is probably not applicable, where's the feedback to the candidate? If the candidate requests, what more could I do? It's a computer program that's made the decision, and it will give you algorithmic responses rather than personal stuff. So there's a de-skilling issue there as well. There's also the issue with the software. We are in the first generation of AI, as it were. Maybe it's the second or third for those working in it, but actually these processes are still untested. There's still a lot to be worked out in the software itself. So when these systems are being applied, they will make mistakes. That is guaranteed. So what's important for us is that there's an accountability level. So if mistakes are made and there are regular reviews of this process, we can see how and where it goes wrong and what we can do to improve it. The problem you've got with the recruitment process is obviously someone loses out on a job or promotion or something like that. So for us, I think there's a lot of issues around using this stuff at this stage. That doesn't mean it can't be used. It's important that when that is being implemented, or the discussions on how the recruitment process work, that trade unions have representations, and as with all implementation of AI, trade unions and workers are consulted so they understand and they know what processes are being put in place, and ultimately that they're accountable.
Great, thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, important concerns to be considering there. And I wonder, Philippa, can I bring you in again now, please, just to ask about what you think, what does the report say about ensuring transparency and collaboration between workers who may have these concerns, the unions who are looking after the workers, and the management who are thinking, oh, I can make some savings here. Efficiency can be better. So what's the report say about that? How do we make sure things are transparent?
So as I mentioned at the start, our kind of guiding principle, the guiding light in the guidance is working in social partnership. And so you won't really see kind of a headline reference to the idea of transparency, but I think transparency really underpins effective social partnership and dialogue, genuine dialogue between employers and their worker representatives. So it is really important to get that right from the very beginning. And that's what one of the ideas that we try and make clear in the guidance is that social partnership should be existing right from the very germ of the idea that we might introduce a piece of software, all the way through implementation and into the evaluation process, if that's the direction the organisation and their partners decide to go. And many organisations, if you're a human resources manager yourself or a union representative with us today, you will know that you already have ways of doing this. And so there is no need to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can apply those well-established approaches to the question of AI. I think one thing that maybe is a slightly new challenge that we haven't necessarily seen before or come across that frequently, is that this is an area where it's quite likely that you will be dealing with third parties, because the software that you might be relying upon or implementing or procuring in the public sector is likely to be developed by a commercial enterprise rather than often within in-house, particularly I would say with recruitment, because there are already a number of very, very prominent tools in this space. So it would seem to sort of be reinventing the wheel if you kind of went and did that yourself, albeit that would have the benefit of any internal build would have the benefit of quality assurance within your own organisation. And that's really one of the challenges with transparency, is that you're kind of dealing with this third party who is not technically part of your social partnership arrangement. So the employer perhaps has a slightly unique role in that situation of, say if you're in a procurement process, you're bringing the workers' concerns forward. So say if it's a discrimination concern, you're bringing that to the third-party companies and you're saying, look, what's your data like on this? What steps are you taking? Are you blind, or have you decided that actually you don't want to be blind, because that creates risks in itself of discrimination? What are your processes around this? How can we get some assurance from you that we're not going to be perpetuating discrimination, which we know is a really significant risk in this space? So making sure that your third party is aware that you're going through, you are very positive in terms of your social partnership approach, and that they are offering the necessary levels of information. And that might be quite uncomfortable for these third parties. They might not be kind of used to engaging in this kind of multi-stakeholder kind of approach and being sort of answerable, as it were, to worker representatives. In terms of the practicalities of achieving some transparency, we mention it in the guidance itself. It's been developed by the central UK government, but we think it's a really good idea, which is the Algorithmic Transparency Recording Standard, or the ATRS. And this is a framework. It actually, when you click on it, it looks like an Excel document, which might seem quite strange. I think one of our colleagues might pop a link in the chat. Thank you, Josh. And it really is an excellent framework for thinking about all the different types of information you might need to share. And it's a way that, you could discuss that, refine the drafting of your document in collaboration with your unions. So, for example, it will set out what is the description of the system, which in itself can be difficult to pin down because they are quite complex. What are we using it for? And importantly, what are we not going to be using it for if there are concerns about kind of mission creep, quote unquote? Some really important information around the technicals of particular systems. So what models is it built on and what data sets will it be using? Are there any kind of limits of those models that we're aware of, or are there issues with the data set? And it's important to note, just as a general comment, that all of this work is only as good as the data that's fed into it. So one of the really important prior stages is having an open discussion about what your data sets are and whether they're up to the task. Do you have the accuracy within your own data streams to engage? And then thinking about devising, in the ATRS, you'll also be thinking about what the risks are, the mitigations, and what impact assessments you'll be putting in place. It's also important, I would say, to think in advance of any governance or evaluation mechanisms if you do decide to implement a piece of software, which includes transparency and openness. So making sure that workers are able to report to their seniors, who then feed into the process, looking at the data outputs in collaboration transparently with your worker representatives, and look at the impact that the software is having, the more kind of qualitative impacts on your working life. And then making sure that once you've done that assessment, you actually report the results back to the staff. So saying, we heard that actually you were finding this problem with the system. So the action we've taken is reporting that to the developer and requesting a change, for example. So making sure that that transparency is going both ways and at all stages of the process. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Philip. Well, that's a really comprehensive answer. I'm going to see if Glyn can add something on this part now then. So Glyn, Chief Digital Officer for the Welsh Government, lots of eyes on the Welsh Government, key partner in the social partnerships work. So Glyn, from your perspective, social partnership principles, can we apply them to bringing in AI decision making?
Yeah, diolch, Pete. Yeah, so obviously one of my roles is to manage our internal use of digital and technology in Welsh Government. So this is very much the heart of what we've been thinking about over the past couple of years. And if you think about the principles of social partnership, it's been well mentioned by Aimee, Philip and Tom already: collaboration, cooperation, transparency, inclusivity. The key here is to work together with clear communication between employer and workforce representatives from the very start of a proposal, as Philip said, even when you're deciding whether you're going to build or buy, that really early engagement about the problem and what you're going to try and do about it. So I suppose lots of comments already to support this. Just to reflect on our approach, we've embedded regular dialogue with trade unions on whatever our digital developments are in Welsh Government, and that's wider than AI, and use of AI for decision making around the workforce. That would be a critical component, but we've done it with other aspects of any digital transformation as well, which might impact on our workforce. And although Copilot is not a recruitment tool, I think it's a good example where we've tried to do this. We started looking at Copilot in 2023. We engaged really early on with the trade unions to talk about our plans for trialing it. We involved them. We gave them an early license so that trade union representatives could use it, as well as some of our staff networks, our disabled staff networks, for example. And we got really good feedback from those networks around how Copilot could benefit, but also the risks. And then we've obviously taken on that evidence and worked with trade union and others to think about how to mitigate those risks. For example, capability of staff need to be trained, and staff need the support to be able to help use these tools. Otherwise, we'll just reinforce a digital divide in a workforce, or whatever that might be. But I know I'm going off the topic of recruitment and so on. But the other really important point about that engagement as well is, as Philip has talked about, the transparency, who is making the decisions, having those early conversations with workforce representatives around the benefits, the risks, how decisions will be made, who is accountable, who is responsible, and also where's the right to rectification and the right to appeal in the process. And getting all that agreed up front, I think, is really critical for this. In this example, there are actually three sets of engagements I would see as well. Firstly, you've got the people who will be doing the recruitment, the line managers, to help them understand how tools are being used, what it means for them, what it means for decision making in terms of them as line managers. There's the people who are being recruited and how we're transparent and clear with them. They may be internal staff, but they also may be external. So we need to be clear on how we're using AI, how decisions are being made. And thirdly, with the HR workforce, to understand their concerns about, is this displacing their specialist expertise? How is this being used in decision making? What skills do they need to use to be able to use these tools in decision making? So that engagement isn't one size fits all. I think is a wide range of social partnership engagement. Thanks, Pete.
Great, thank you very much, Glyn. Okay, so questions, if you have any, please fire them away in the chat there, but we are going to go on to now scenario 2, and that's going to appear on the screen any moment. Here we go. So this one, as much as we can appreciate the motivation and to improve response times for this scenario and experiences of those receiving care, it's a tricky situation. So I'll read it out loud so we've got it captured. A local authority introduces an AI-driven system to allocate social care workers to home visits and their care responsibilities based on predictions about the demand and efficiency. So while the system optimizes the scheduling, social workers and care staff find that it overrides their professional judgment. It limits their flexibility and their ability to prioritize based on user needs or real human experiences. So it's a tricky situation. We can understand why it's arisen, but I wonder if I can come back to Aimee now, first of all. Aimee, do you have any thoughts on how in a situation like this we can ensure there's a human in command for strategic decisions about AI? Accountability and transparency are words we've used quite a lot this morning, but human in command is my real question to you. How do we ensure that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And like you say, it has been mentioned. Tom mentioned earlier that the importance of human accountability for decisions that are taken when we're using and adopting AI. And I mean, there are many things that in theory sound like a great idea, but the reality post implementation just doesn't work in the way that you've envisaged it. So in this example, I think Glyn just referred to the importance of early engagement with the people that are on the end of these decisions in developing the system. So it clearly sounds like that didn't happen in this case. But this is exactly why it's critical to have a human in command. So someone that's accountable, that has oversight and meaningful responsibility over any algorithmic management system, and that they understand how the outputs are being derived to pick out bias or unintended consequences, as we're seeing here in this example. And they then have a role in listening to the feedback of the people at the end of the decisions and taking a judgment on how to move forward. So in this situation, that could be to abandon the product altogether, or to work with social workers and care staff in this case to build in additional aspects to the algorithm that provides a better balance between efficiency and professional judgment. Again, partnership working. Artificial intelligence tools, I think Philippa, you mentioned earlier, are only as good as the data or modelling that powers them. So always ensuring that you have a human in command will allow that oversight and control that ensures it continues to be fit for purpose. We need humans all over this, that are accountable, that are listening, that are actively seeking feedback, and are taking what could be seen as brave decisions in this space when things aren't going as they should be going, because it has to be for the benefit of its intended purpose. And if it isn't, then we need to be doing something about it, and only humans can make that decision.
Thanks, Aimee. That's interesting, isn't it? It's yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, so let me bring Tom in then. So, Tom, from your perspective, Aimee's talked about this, about involving people at the start, but how can we get frontline staff to be able to give meaningful input into algorithm-driven processes?
Well, let me be the monger of doom, because I think this is a great scenario here, actually. And I think that one of the big things people are looking at AI to do in Britain is our NHS has extremely long waiting lists, as does our social care sector, and the demands on those sectors are only going to get more in recent years. So I think this is a really good example of where we're likely to see early implementation of AI. And what's absolutely essential is that because quite often the response is there's so much pressure on a system like this, what we need to do is we need to maximize the amount of visits that are are delivered, rather than actually maximising the value and the outcome of a visit. But I think that's what's absolutely essential, is that when this is going out to tender, or there's a discussion about what types of AI will be used, the workforce needs to be consulted. Because the truth of the matter is, particularly in health and social care, there are so many more value-added aspects that the workforce will add in a way they possibly don't in other sectors, that will lead to much less pressure on the NHS further on. And what's important is, for example, home visits. Every workforce and every workplace is different. If you are doing this in Neath Port Talbot, it will be a very different demand than if you're doing it in Powys. If you're doing it in Cardiff, it'll be very different from if you're doing it in Aberconwy. So there are lots of issues, and that needs to be built in, and workers will know best what the issues are, whether traffic is what parts of the thing will it take longer to get visits to, and that all needs to be built in and regularly updated. I think the other key thing for us with social care workers is, quite often they're the first experts who get there. And what you need with social care, particularly when you're managing things like dementia and long-term decline, as it were, is you need those people to be able to make quick evaluations and decisions about what can be done to try and alleviate future pressures on the service. So, for example, when you see somebody, you might turn up at a house and it may be just, it's a small, quick visit, you cook them some food and you give them the medication and move on. It might be that there are early onset signs of a stroke. It might be that there are early onset signs of other types of dementia. It might be that there's a situation there, like they've smashed something up that needs cleaning up, which will demand more time. And what's absolutely essential is that they have the input into the system to say, this isn't a small term thing, we need more input, we need more time here. And what that will ensure is that, for example, with that system, there's adequate time to do that between calls. It's not that you need to get this done and move on to the next place. There have been some scare stories in the private sector where that just hasn't lined up. And I think a great example was Amazon, which was listed earlier, where we represent members who are basically sent around a warehouse, told what the amount of time machine thinks it takes you to pick something, regardless of whatever else is going on in the warehouse. There might be somebody else there already picking and slowing stuff down. There might be a fall in the warehouse, there might be a break. And what we've seen is workers leave warehouses in ambulances. What we've seen is workers, deciding, actually, this is taking far longer for me to do it. I'm not going to be able to have my lunch hour. I need to work along. So what's absolutely essential with these systems is that it empowers the worker to make the decisions that will optimize not only their work, but the ability to deliver. There's also, it's just not just about empowering workers, it's about expense. If you think about tackling these issues earlier, it's cheaper for the service overall. So if you've got social care workers in these situations, they are the ones who will be able to make the quickest calls about what is next and what is needed next, and they should be respected to do so, because that will alleviate a lot of pressure off the system in the future. I think this comes back as well to what we think social partnership should be. So the implementation of AI is a social partnership endeavour. It is for us all to have conversations about where and when it works. In these situations, it's absolutely essential that, and it's something as important as social care, where, actually there are real term implications. Quite often there can be life or death implications about what happens, or long-term health implications. It's absolutely essential that the communication between the worker and the management system and the employer is optimum, so that you can ensure that you're making decisions that are, once again, accountable, but also in the best interest of the patient and the service. I do have some more notes, but I think it'll be more rambling, so I'll cut there.
Thank you very much, Tom. No, that captured it, I think. Well done, thank you. I'm going to come over to Philippa now then. So Philippa, we've talked quite a bit about, transparency and making sure people are in the loop with what's going on. But the question is for you, the safeguards that should be in place to ensure we have a human in the loop for decision making. So Aimee talked about human in command. This is human in the loop for the decision making in day-to-day operations. What can we do?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it speaks to a lot of the discussion that's happening in the chat, really, about making sure that we empower workers and that workers are really integrated into the design and operation of the system itself. And that will look really, really different per system. So thinking about this particular idea, and you can totally understand why a local authority or a social care provider may want to make this kind of efficiency and you know, take into account things like traffic and all of those other extraneous factors into predicting where their workers might be at any given time. We've also seen some success. So there are examples that I think were kind of before COVID where a company has been brought into a local authority, I think it was in Neath Talbot, to design with the workers a system which would have this kind of effect. And so it can clearly be done in a way that is effective and useful for the workers. I think what's important is to start that listening early. What kind of concerns are you hearing from your workforce? And then again, taking that kind of representative role for the employer to the developers and say, well, what can we be doing in the design and deployment of the system to make sure that we have a human in the loop, as it were, in these operational decisions. We could also think of it at multiple levels. So you could have the ability of someone at home base, as it were, at the central organisation, to have the ability to review the whole process. So all of the data output, to bring that all together and do an overarching review. And there are things that we should also look out for that weren't mentioned in the scenario, but other things that would be highly relevant for workers. So are we making sure that these shifts that are created are fitting with the childcare commitments, for example, or the working patterns that have been agreed with a particular worker? You know, you might see that actually, well, I know that, you know, my colleague Steve has a half-time working and he likes to pick up his children, or he has elder care commitments. We need to make sure that we're respecting that. And obviously being open to workers bringing concerns as well would also be really important. So having that capacity to look at the whole scale of decisions being made and making sure that the utilisation of resource is sensible and seems to match what that individual's expertise would suggest would be appropriate for the care that they are providing. And really important, and this speaks again to what Aimee was saying about human in command, we need to make sure that we have the ability to interact and make potentially difficult decisions around using technology if that seems to be necessary. So if it looks like actually the system is creating more problems than it's solving, then we go back either to the developers and say we need some fairly massive changes, or we even go back to an analog system or whatever we were using before, maybe partial digitalization, for example. And I think one thing that particularly fits with the messages that we're receiving in the chat is to make sure that we empower the worker individually. So not just this sort of systemic overview of human in the loop, but also the individual, because that's the person who, as Tom was saying, has the expertise and is on the ground. And they might know within the first minute of a visit that the allotted 30 minutes is not going to be sufficient. And if they leave at the 30-minute mark, that's going to put pressure on other resources, for example, the emergency services or GP time. So actually, it would be more effective for the whole system to stay for an hour. So I would say in that situation, say, and I would expect that this would be how it would work, if you were using handheld devices in this situation to prompt you on your schedule and to move you between locations, there should be a capacity built in where the worker themselves can say, override schedule, I need an hour, and then make sure that all the other visits in the day are then rearranged so they're not under pressure with other clients and patients. And then to feed that back, right, as well. So not just that their own schedule gets readjusted, but the algorithm itself knows that, okay, in this situation, you know, for whatever reason, it might be a health deterioration, a circumstance, like Tom was mentioning, an accident, for example, which needs a bit more care, that actually we need to be responsive, and that for the next week, for example, that client may well need a little bit more time than they have in previous weeks, and making sure that it's really responsive. But you can see that there are really practical ways that a human can be put in the loop, both kind of strategically, systemically, but also on a day-to-day individual basis. And we need to think creatively and work with developers to come up with a solution which meets the needs of ultimately the people that should be at the heart of any system, particularly in healthcare, which is the patient who is being looked after.
Thank you very much, Philippa. Okay, I'm going to go on to Glyn. Glyn, I've got quite a challenge for you, I'm afraid. So this question is big enough in itself, but the extra challenge is to try and keep it to about 3 minutes in total, so that we've got some time for questions, if that's all right. So we're already at 10 to 11, and I can see the chat is really busy. So the question for you, Glyn, is how do you think we can balance the needs for improving services, as in the motivation for this, across people, processes, and technology?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And I think the other panel members have done an excellent job of talking through the scenario, so I won't go over that ground. But it really talks to the point I want to make, which is, and it has been mentioned in the chat already. So all this is about solving a problem. We need to understand what problem we're going to solve, and not introducing technology or AI just for the sake of it. And we're in the middle of this maelstrom of AI, and those of us on the call, well, actually, either whether from a digital or HR background, we're being emailed, asked to look at products constantly because this will solve our thing, without actually asking what the thing we want to solve is. So the first thing we need to do, as with any digital service development, is to think about the problem we're trying to solve and consider how best it could be achieved through user-centered design. It's all in the digital service standards for Wales. CDPS have got loads of good guidance on this. Looking at the problem, working with users to understand what do we need to do here, and to consider how this best can be achieved. And the first thing we want to look at is, well, actually, do we just tweak the process for setting these rotas? It may just be as simple as that. What's the problem in terms of the rotas? How can we do that? It might be more cost efficient, and I think somebody mentioned this, bring in another member of staff, do something analog rather than invest in a digital solution that needs watering and feeding over the next decade. There actually might be a more cost efficient other solution. But at the end of the day, and this is where we really see the transformation, it may be to invest in digital, and it may be that will involve AI. But let's do that for the right things, for the right reasons, and to come to that decision to consider everything, the cost, the effectiveness, but also the end users. And in this example, we mean both the social care users, but also the service users at the end of the day who are getting the care and support. And continuous user engagement to see if what we're doing is working, to test all those issues and risks that other colleagues have mentioned. And it's the same with any other problem. Bring people with us, engage with people throughout the process, and make sure we're doing this for the right reason and not just chucking AI at something in a service which may not be mature enough to be able to implement AI. Loads of comments in the chat about skills. Have we got the skills and capacity to use AI for this particular problem? Have we got the data to do it? In a lot of cases, the answer will be no, we're not there yet. So we need to think about all that in the round before jumping into a solution. I think you've got some excellent guidance on making those decisions as well, Pete, so I'm sure you're going to come to that.
Got some adverts at the end, you're right, Glyn. Thank you very much, and thanks for keeping to time. That's brilliant. So yes, the chat has been alive with lots of interesting comments and queries in there. I'm conscious of only a few minutes to go on the webinar now, but if there are questions you'd like to ask or pose, I can see hands are up already. We'll try and take those now as people are trying to answer the questions in the chat as well. So I think I saw Kieran. Kieran with a hand up there. Do you want to come in, Kieran?
Yeah, Kieran from NWSSP. I'm also a trade union rep, and one thing that I think that there should be here is an equality impact assessment on every AI tool that gets used. That's the only way that we can make sure there's no marginalisation of any staff or disabilities. I know it's more paperwork and more people involved, but if we got to get it right to stop it, to be fully inclusive.
I think that's a really good point. I think I've seen nods from the panelists. Anybody want to come back on that, or are we all in agreement? It just makes perfect sense. But Tom, do you want to come in?
Just on that, as long as the quality impact report isn't done by AI, we just want to make that clear. Otherwise, we're on a new box of worms.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, I totally agree, Kieran. And algorithmic transparency recording standard lists a number of different impact assessments. So there's a data protection impact assessment that needs to be done. There's an equality impact assessment, as you mentioned, and there's also quite an innovative good work algorithmic impact assessment, which thinks more holistically about a range of kind of workplace impacts. So it would be, you know, open to organizations to engage in all of those different components, and even the most basic data protection impact assessment, which would be required for all of these types of systems because they are high risk systems for the most part. All of these different systems would need one of those, and that does make reference to the fundamental rights of the data subject, which would include equality. So any which way we choose to get there, I totally agree there should be a serious consideration of equality and also really clear and concrete steps as to how we're going to reduce those risks.
Thanks, Philip. Glyn, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, just very quickly, and I want to link it to a question that was put in the chat very early on as well about AI policy. So I think, yes, organisations should have something to help guide the governance and approach to an AI in an organisation. We developed quite early on a senior information risk owner notice, a CSIRO notice, explaining our approach when ChatGPT exploded to say what staff could and couldn't do with ChatGPT. We've adopted it now for other things. We're setting in governance around new AI tools and what the decision-making framework should be around that. But in particular, just to pick up Kieran's point, that includes the need for quality impact assessment or integrated impact assessments to do that. So I would definitely endorse a policy that sets that out for your organisations.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to push my luck and see if there's another question. Looking, I know there's a couple of things we want to share towards the end of this as well, but any last questions in the last 5 minutes that anybody would like to come in, or comments? Happy to have comments.
So could I just Pete there?
Oh, could I just put in a brief call, because I appreciate we've got all sorts of different organisations here, potentially probably a lot from the public sector. We're really keen to talk to any organisations who are looking to actually go forward with implementing any particular piece of software, or even in that very preliminary stage of thinking, do we even need to do this? We'd be really interested in talking to you about potentially collaborating on and supporting you in going through that process, using the guidance as kind of a basic framework for that discussion. Yeah, we'd be really keen to hear from you. So you know who I am, and I'm very easy to find online, so do get in touch with me, or perhaps the CDPS can facilitate that connection so that we can perhaps work together. So just to put that call in while you're thinking, if you're brave enough to raise your hand and ask a question. Thanks, everyone.
If that filled the uncomfortable silence that I was going to leave, thanks for the good one. Okay.
Pete, there's a couple of questions there around skills. I don't know, obviously, with your skills hat on, the head of skills at CDPS. I know there's a question here, and from John saying about as oh, sorry, I've lost the question there, but if you can find it there for me. But it's something a couple of addressing around sort of the loss of skills and how do we upskill staff in this area.
Yeah, I found that question. Thank you very much. Yeah, great question, John. This was, let me read this out so everyone can hear. It's, as well as the human in the loop, how do we deal with the loss of skills in the workforce? Over time, we lose the skills needed to design rotas, take minutes to plan workflows. And we've seen this happen over the last few years with mobile phones and sat-navs becoming business critical. Do we think about how we will maintain skills, or do we place all our faith in AI solution and hope that it never goes wrong? So I have lots of thoughts on this. I don't know, anybody from the panel want to jump in?
I think you should use chair's privilege. You're the expert on skills.
All right. Thank you very much. So it's an emerging question, I think. So the skills we're talking about will be nudged to one side. I don't think we can say that we're never going to need those skills again, but tools like Copilot that was mentioned earlier seems to be doing a really good job at taking minutes. And could we not, help? It's an interesting one, but could the people who would normally be taking all their time writing those minutes up and making sure they're correct and so on, not use the AI as a starting point to help them in their work? That's the kind of thing I'm thinking. That's the human in the loop part for me as well. So it's not a skill that's going to be completely and utterly handed over. to AI, but if it's done properly, it'll be an assistant to the people doing that work, I think. I can see Tom and Aimee. Tom, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, I'll just be quick on it, because again, it's about what we use AI for and what it's about, right? And the point for trade unions is that we think this is a huge opportunity to upskill the quality of work. And actually what AI can do at this stage is it can destroy loads of boring, old-fashioned, minute taking. It's an important job, absolutely, but you wouldn't say it's the most, for a lot of people, it's not the most engaging kind of work. It is processes that can be done at a very quick speed, and they take loads of boring. That's why the recruitment one was such a good one, because anyone who's read CVs will know, someone spent a lot of time writing it, but it's really boring to read hundreds and hundreds of CVs. So what's important is it's accountable. It's important to remember that AI it's not a system that's going to get rid of lazy people. It's not a system that is going to, start motivating your workforce. It is a tool that you can use to improve the outcomes of work. And when we say empowering the worker, it's about upskilling your staff with AI. And if you start at that basis, how can I make my staff more effective? How can I improve the quality of their work and make them better at it? How can I use it to motivate them better? That's where you'll get the good outcomes. And the key way of doing that is, of course, engaging with us from the beginning.
Thank you. Aimee, we're right to time. Can you make this point in a few seconds?
Absolutely, I can. And it was linked to Tom, so I won't go over any ground that Tom covered. But it was just to say, if we look back 10 years ago, there are roles that exist now that didn't exist back then because of advances in technology. Arguably, they are better quality types of roles. So for us as HR professionals, the beauty is in strategic workforce planning to understand where the new skills and capabilities are needed and how we work with the organisation to support that kind of advancement in skills as other things ramp down. I'm done.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Sorry to rush you. Conscious of the time, thank you ever so much to everyone who's joined us today. There's a couple of slides left. I'm just going to flick through these quickly and not dwell on them. But I do want to say thank you to our panel and all the work that's gone in to prepare these reports and circulate them and socialise them. And a massive thank you to everyone who's joined us as well to ask these interesting questions and contribute. So just on screen now, you'll see the Menti again, which was about key takeaways. And then Mike, I think you were controlling the screen. Can we pop on to the next slide? Just to quickly mention some adverts before we finish. If you need some more guidance, which links to the WPC guidance about the use of artificial intelligence in the public sector, head to the CDPS website, where you will see our guidance tailored for Wales, but taken from the best that we can find. And then on to the next one. If we've inspired you to find out more about artificial intelligence, we have a backlog. We have a playlist of artificial intelligence webinars similar to this, where we've had experts from places like the Turing Institute, from the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, speaking about artificial intelligence and the impact. And that's on our YouTube channel. Again, available over there in the chat in just a moment. And if you are really interested, and I'd encourage people to join this as well and talk about it with everyone else that's talking about it, we have a thriving AI community of practice. So please come join us too. I'm sorry, Josh, you're putting the links in the chat and then going super fast. Too fast to type, I think. But I'm going to bring things to a close there because we've already gone over by 2 minutes. Apologies if we made you late for your next meeting. Diolch yn fawr am ymuno ni. Thank you for joining us and have a lovely day. Thank you very much. See you next time.